colleagues, being unable to attend the conference in Budapest, I'm addressing you in this pre-recorded way. I prepared my PowerPoint presentation in rather detailed way so that it can be checked and consulted separately, but I will present it in the most simple and more quick way in order to be in the frame of this 20 minutes. So let's start our presentation in order not to lose the time. Important thing in Croatian for Croatian constitutionalism is the fact that it was based on that it emerged from the medieval continuity of autonomy in the scope of as part of the lands of the Holy Crown that functioned very smoothly, institutions up to 19th century and the clash of nation building processes, Hungarian and Croatian. This was eventually settled by Croatian-Hungarian settlement 1868 that introduced, that granted broad Croatian autonomy, still with control functions of the central government, with internal government being based on the model of, let's call it constitutional dualism, with balanced positions of executive and the Diet, and even kind of supremacy of the Diet. And in the government, the most prominent position was the chief of executive, the Ban. Croatia, this autonomy inside Hungary did not satisfy Croatian national movement, so it searched for another solutions. And in the circumstances of the time, the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, later on the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, was formed. It was formed as the nation state of three named nations, later a single Yugoslav nation, and this definitely did not satisfy Croatian attempts of preserving its own, respecting their own identity, cultural and up to a certain point political. So the Croatian question was the biggest problem of this country, and it was resolved by agreement 1939 that again introduced the autonomy, Croatian autonomy in the form of Banat of Croatia, which was rather similar to the Hungarian model, except that the Croatian position was more independent, the territory was much larger, but internal government was followed the determinants that were present already in the Hungarian framework, that is the kind of constitutional dualism, in fact, the supremacy of government. This state collapsed in 1941. Independent state of Croatia was formed as Nazi-fascist puppet state with a totalitarian model of government, and it also did not last for long. But the Communist Party established the new model of the Yugoslav state based on the Soviet model of federalism, in which each of the recognized nations, now they were not just three, but Serbs, Croats, Slovenes, Macedonians, and Montenegrins, were supposed to have its own republic. On this basis, the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, People's Republic of Yugoslavia, and the republics, six republics of these states, were constitutionalized, including the Croatia, and they were based on the right of people to self-determination and secession. That is, each of the nations was supposed to have its own People's National Republic, except Bosnia and Herzegovina. And so the Constitution of People's Republic of Croatia, 1947, proclaimed that it was based, Croatia, that republic was based on the right to self-determination of the Croatian people. Even though this federation was supposed to be based on shared sovereignty, in practice it was centralized federation, till the Constitution 1974 that introduced extensive decentralization that especially strengthened the position of republics and two autonomous provinces that already had tradition of its own identity. This was a way to avoid the disintegration of Yugoslavia that continuously was main danger of that state. But it was obviously not succeeded because almost immediately after Tito's death, the crisis radicalized and it expanded. And in 1990, Croatia, under internal pressure and of course under external pressure, fall of Berlin Wall, Croatia organized multi-party elections with Croatian Democratic Union, Nationalist Provenance, Party of Nationalist Provenance, that came up to power and get majority of votes in the parliament. The parliament then prepared the new constitution that was accepted in December 1990. It was supposed to be based on positive, as its fundaments, as proclaimed by the Constitutional Committee, positive Croatian constitutional tradition, explicitly including constitutional heritage of anti-fascist council of liberation, of popular liberation of Yugoslavia and Croatia, that is the communist heritage, that referred to the federalism, of course, not to the authoritarian concept, and on the return to the European tradition with consideration of the North American tradition. But apart of such accent on tradition, it was very, it was only minor, present in minor cases, but important. These cases are the preamble of the Constitution that reconstructs forms of the Croatian statehood and autonomy since 9th century, and also consists reformulation of definition of Croatia from 1974 Constitution. So according to the current Constitution, it was a little bit changed after that. Republic of Croatia is the national state of the Croatian people, the national state of the Croatian people, and the state of members of nations and minorities living in it, Serbs, Muslims, Slovenes, Czechs, Slovaks, Italians, Hungarians, Jews, and others, providing equality of all citizens, etc., etc. This definition of the national state of Croats contradicts in a way Article 1 that defines that in Croatia power belongs to the people as the community of free and equal citizens. So this contradiction is kind of reconciled by the Croatian Constitutional Court, I would say rather successfully. I would also say that this type of communist heritage is present in almost all other former Yugoslav republics, as you can see from these formulations, except in Kosovo and Montenegro that are based on a completely civic basis, their constitution. Yet apart, as I said, apart of this stress on the tradition, the model of power accepted in the original Constitution 1990 was semi-presidential model. The arguments for that was that it reconciles democracy and concentration of powers needed in turbulent conditions of that time, that it has been already accepted in some Central European countries, and that it is complementary to Croatian tradition. Apart of that, it was bicameralism was accepted, which was contrary to the Croatian tradition of unicameral diet. This was against advices of all Croatian constitutional lawyers gathered in this committee, and upon the will of the President Tudjman, whose word was always the last. And he was persuaded by his Croatian American, one former very successful American governor of Croatian origin, who persuaded him that bicameralism would be good for Croatia. This did not last for very long. The constitution proclaimed that Croatia was the sovereign state, but not independent. It proclaimed that Croatia will remain within Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia until its reorganization on the basis of the agreement of the republics, that meant confederation, or until other decision of the Croatian parliament, that meant independence in case of failure of agreement on confederations. A part of that, Croatian constitution included the provisions on the Croatian armed forces and Croatian foreign politics, but these provisions at that time were not enforced, because this would brought Croatia into the conflict with federal constitution and very likely intervention of Yugoslav People's Army. The negotiations on confederation were not progressing. Serbia and Montenegro were decisively against it. Slovenia was rushing to the full independence. So Croatia followed Slovenia, organized referendum on May 1991 with not very smart umbrella question, but still got very prominent support. And on 25th June 1991, the Parliament proclaimed constitutional decision on the proclamation of sovereignty and independence of the Republic of Croatia on the basis of the right of the Croatian people to self-determination, including the right to dissociate and associate with other peoples and states. This decision was argumented by the fact that SFRY was acting as constitutionally unregulated state, that it violates grossly human and minority rights and rights of federal units, that federal regulation does not provide for solution of the crisis, and that confederal solution is neglected. It's interesting that Croatia introduced the concept right to dissociate instead of constitutionally recognized right to secession, because this right to dissociate was understood as the process of disintegrating the whole state, not separation of particular territory from the state that continues to exist, but the process of dissolution, which was accepted by the international community later on. The constitutional this constitutional decision, this proclamation of independence, was accepted, but it was not enforced, a little bit paradoxically, because it had to be enforced by special proclamation of the Croatian parliament, but it never happened. So theoretically speaking, Croatia has never been, this decision has never been enforced. Yet, on the other side, on that same date, the constitutional provisions on the Croatian armed forces and foreign politics were enforced. So Croatia had proclaimed its own armed forces. And a part of that, Croatia exchanged acts of recognition with Slovenia and Lithuania, meaning that it behaved like an independent state. Brioni Declaration that was imposed by EEC at that time in order to try to achieve peace in 3 months term was accepted by all conflicting sides, but nothing happened in these 3 months except that aggression of Yugoslav army and supported by Serbia was radicalized and intensified. And on 8th October, Croatian parliament, just as Slovenian, proclaimed termination of all constitutional bonds with SFRY, proclaimed that SFRY does not exist any longer, that it does not, and that it recognizes only independence of other republics, and that it will continue the process of disassociation with all other republics in determination of their mutual rights and obligation. Also, legislative activity was intensified. Croatia was bringing its own laws, etc., and started to behave completely like independent country. So the question is, what is the day of independence? Is it 25th June or 8th October? It's of course important because of symbolic reasons, but also because of legal consequences, for example, because of trials to war crimes. Croatian Supreme Court and Constitutional Court opted for 8th October after rather a lot of time, but part of Croatian international lawyers think that the real date of Croatian independence is 25th June. After the Dayton Agreement, which ended the hostilities, well, not completely, because Kosovo exploded only later on, but between these major participants, the ambience changed and Croatia turned into internal stabilization and improving international relations. This was reflected in several very important constitutional revisions. One is quite interesting from December 1997, and it was a reaction on EU initiatives for regional associations that Croatia did not like, that Croatia did not welcome. So but the pressure on Croatia was pretty firm. So Croatia reacted by the constitutional amendment by which provided for procedure for entering into association with other countries, and ban the same amendment ban of entering of Croatia into any association that would lead to renewal of South Slavic Union or any form of the Balkan state. Apart of that, the President Tudjman's authoritative style of government after end of hostilities started to produce great dissatisfaction and even quite large demonstrations against him and against this type of government. So after Tudjman's death in 1999, new pools turned completely into different sides. That liberal government was voted, and it very quickly introduced new amendments by which it banned the membership of President of Republic in any political party. Before that, Tudjman was President of Republic and President of the ruling party. It also reduces presidential powers very firmly. So he was led only direct elections and legitimacy and participation in foreign politics and control of intelligence service that he shares with President of government. Both signatures are required for any important decision in these two fields. So with this, semi-presidential model was replaced by parliamentary government, and Professor Smilko Sokol speaks about, in fact, not parliamentary government, but quarter-presidential system. He predicted that it will produce problems. In fact, it did not produce problems, but in practice, it produced cohabitation, which, in fact, Croatian voters liked. And they keep on electing president, which was of different party political origin than the government. Croats obviously do not like to have all eggs in the same basket. This could be perhaps challenged with the person due to personality of our current president, which is quite vivid and which turned this cohabitation into very conflictuous cohabitation and blockade of certain functions. Apart of that, the same year saw the extension of human and minority right grants. At that time, 22 minorities were acknowledged by the Constitution, and abolishment of bicameral system with almost political consensus. And a part of that, two other important amendments were expected procedures considering expected accession to NATO and the EU, and definition of marriage as union of man and woman 2013 on the basis of popular referendum. I will conclude that Croatian constitutional experience of 19th-20th century is based on two rather contradictory dimensions. One is Croatian constitutional identity in the broader multicultural frameworks, and the other is a tendency to constitute its own independent national or at least independent state that probably indicate deeper layers of Croatian constitutionality as being based in the right to self-determination, but also openness to participation of broader association. And that was my paper. More of it, if something is not completely clear, you can check the PowerPoint presentation or consult, of course, the paper itself. I hope we will have a chance to meet in person in some other opportunities. Goodbye.